Well, I wish to extend my warmest greetings to all of you. Welcome to our hermitage, to our family, to our home. I take it many of you are local to Crestone, and of course we're giving thanks for the rain, the snow, this spring so badly needed. And as most of you know, I am in retreat. I'm still in the flow of retreat, but the circumstances became appropriate for me to step out of retreat today in order to offer this teaching, these thoughts. And I am rejoicing that my longtime friend and Dharma brother, Doug Wienhoff, who's been leading these Ghatika monthly sessions for the last several months, is now in a very strict retreat himself after having given years really to the design and implementation and building of the Spiritual Director's Cottage, which is now complete. And our founder, Lama Alan Wallace, is in his own retreat there. And so for those of you who don't know me at all, my name is Eva Natanya, and I have been here from the inception of our Center for Contemplative Research, but I actually have a much longer history with Nada Hermitage. I had been doing summer retreats here since 2008. So this chapel has been a home for Christian worship for a very long time, and then also now in our primarily Buddhist community. And we've done many teachings, many rituals, many meditations here in this chapel. But for me personally, that continuity is always very, very real. Please come in. Welcome. And so this time is precious for me to think of speaking, even coming out of retreat to speak, is a step that says, okay, if I'm going to say something, I need to say the most important things. And so I know that many of you have very different background coming to these sessions, and all of you around the world. I'm intensely aware of the diversity of our community gathering today, literally as far as Australia and Europe, South America, and North America. But I feel that the thoughts I wish to share with you today can actually go to the heart of where everyone is, because you'll each hear it in your own way. And for those of you who have been following Doug Wienhoff's sessions these last several months, and Clara Seeger's even before that, you already have a sense of the flow of the types, the core meditations that our long-term retreatants here at the Center for Contemplative Research are engaging in. And I hope and pray that many of you have been implementing these in your own daily practice through these months, if they're not already familiar for you from long before. But where I'd like to go today is to the heart of why. What is the motivation that provides the foundation for these kinds of practices of meditation, of stillness, of finding the stillness of awareness in the midst of the motion of the movements of the mind? Why? Why is that worthwhile? Why is that important? And in turn, by setting that foundational motivation, we also discover at deeper and deeper levels what are those meditative practices leading to. So it's both the reason for them at the beginning and the goal at the end, and then the sustaining energy, the sustaining enthusiasm, the sustaining motivation that keeps us going through our practice every day, every week, every month, every year. And as we will explore today, perhaps for thousands of years, millions of years. And what does that mean? To have a motivation that could last as long as the universe lasts. So the term conative intelligence, by which this talk is in part entitled, may not be familiar to many of you. Conation is a technical term that's used in psychology, but it hasn't reached the public sphere as much as other psychological terms have. But conation covers the whole range of mental processes that have to do with motivation, but it's also our desires, our intentions, our goal setting, and the way that we orient what we do toward a particular goal. And so we all are having conation all the time, actually. So it's something deeply familiar experientially. And so I don't want anyone to be stopped by that word. It's simply, I'm not sure if the word is related to conate, as in born with you, but it probably is, as in it's with you all the time. Why are you doing what you're doing? But so many of us don't get around to asking that question until we've actually been driven by motivations for a long time. Or as children, we might have those reveries of, why do I go to school? Is it because I want to get good grades? But why do I want to get good grades? Because I want to be successful. But why do I want to be successful? Because I want to, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm sure most of us have gone through that train of thought at some point. But of course, as our minds are unstable, we may get answers at one time, and then we forget about them. And then we're caught in a rush or a momentum of choices we made in the past, but don't remember quite why we made them. And yet we've committed to so many things and responsibilities and burdens and joyful responsibilities as well, to family, to spouses, to friends, to a job, to a community. But it takes a step back. It requires a silence. It requires a removal sometimes to ask those questions afresh. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And do I have to be doing everything that I am doing, or could I actually step away from some of those engagements without harming anybody? Because that's the big question. Never step away from an engagement that would harm someone else. But can you step back just enough to ask those questions with the freshness of a 5-year-old? Why? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And so conative intelligence is the ability to hone, to cultivate, to train not only our desires, but how those desires turn into intentions, and how those intentions, whether short-term or long-term, in turn transform our motivation to do anything we do on a given day or a given hour. I think I need to say that again, because that's essentially important to be able to follow. Our desires are impulses. Our desires are inclinations, leanings toward, I'm attracted to this, or I'm not attracted to that, so therefore I will be attracted to that. You know, it's like our navigation on a road. But we can have many desires arise in the mind that don't turn into intentions. And actually, the more you meditate, the more you see how possible that is to watch a desire arise in the mind and either just say, well, I'm not following any thoughts right now, so let it disappear. Or if you're in a more analytical mode of meditation, to watch that desire arise and say, now let me look at that. Is that a wise desire? If I follow the implications of what that desire would lead me to, will it turn out well? What actions would that involve? Would those actions be helpful to others? Would those actions be harmful to others? That's how we can look at a desire. And that takes intelligence. So this is already a kind of conative intelligence to examine, to investigate a desire. And we can do that all in our own minds while sitting totally still. Then we need to be very careful about when we let desires turn into intentions, because intentions start to move us. They turn into choices. Will I do this? Will I do this? Will I speak in this way? Will I not speak in this way? Will I speak to this person? Will I not engage with this person? It's countless choices that actually have to be made based on how we've evaluated our desires and allowed them or not allowed them to turn into intentions. Now, intention and motivation could be very close, but here I would use motivation in a way that then underlies. So our intentions are driving our choices moment by moment by moment, but then motivation is what underlies our very ability to propagate those intentions over and over again. The definition of the term in Tibetan that I'm translating as motivation is, before you do something, how are you thinking about it? And so that's literally, I mean, in English, it's a very good word, motivate, what makes you move. And then intention has to do more with how your mind is moving towards its objects, as in what it observes through the physical senses, what it observes through the mental sense, and then how it engages in actions of body and speech, moment by moment. But then goals, as it were, at the end point of all of that, are what enable us to look back upon, as if from the future, why are we doing what we're doing? So you see how each of those is interrelated, and it's important in our own minds to be able to make the distinctions between desires, intentions, motivation, and goals. So that intelligence is something we actually need to be cultivating all the time. And sometimes it becomes an internal questioning when you are making a meal or taking a walk, just checking in. Why? And sometimes your answer may be very clear and very joyful, and then you don't need to keep analyzing. Just ride it. Ride the wave because you know it's virtue. You know it's beneficial for yourself and others. And if you feel confused when you ask that question, then that's time to investigate. That's time to ask question upon question. And we will do that in our meditation today, because indeed, this is a session, a gathering about meditation. And it will be a very different kind of meditation from the modes of stillness, of shamatha, that Doug has been sharing with you these last months. But I hope you'll be able to see how intimately integrated the ability to cultivate stillness of mind is with the ability to cultivate wiser and wiser choices. And in turn, the wiser our choices and motivation is, even for meditating, the more powerful and meaningful our shamatha meditation, or any other type of meditation or practice we may do, will become. But as I said, our time is short, and I don't want to stop there, because if I simply ask you to ask yourselves those questions, you might be limited by the worldview in which you have been viewing the world for a long time. And you may be very satisfied with that worldview, and that's wonderful, whatever that worldview may be. But whatever our worldview may be, if we don't keep actually investigating how we view the world, it won't stay the same, it'll go flat. I remember, some of you may know, I was a ballet dancer in my first life, first career, and this thought came to me so vividly at a certain point. I was been a professional for a number of years already in New York City. And I saw that if I didn't keep striving to improve as a dancer, to improve that technique every single day in class, much less in rehearsal and on stage, I wouldn't stay the same, I would get worse. And that's something I think, whatever our profession or our mode of life may be, if we look carefully enough, we see it's the nature of things. To stagnate is not to stay the same. It's to solidify. And I mean, even the word stagnate, we think of mossy water that's getting moldy and rancid. And so if our motivations stagnate, they actually will ossify and degrade. So that's why our worldview is so inextricably and intimately connected to our cultivation of conative intelligence. Because if we're seeking to find purer and higher and more meaningful motivations, but we aren't able to continue to question what is the nature of the world we're encountering and what are the nature of the problems that we're seeking to solve, the people we're trying to help, then our motivation will be stultified because we won't really believe we can do anything. You see, because if our worldview is stagnating, it's actually, this is a tendency of human nature, which the more you look, the more you'll see it's true. When we don't keep investigating, it's not just our motivations that ossify or stagnate, it's our very views of people, of situations, of the planet as a whole, of the problems. So we might see problems as, oh, this is degenerating, or this is a climate change that's getting worse, catastrophically worse. But if we don't investigate more and more deeply the nature of that reality, we'll fall into depression about a reified view of what it is that's happening. An reified view always lacks details. It fixates on an overall picture and then that makes that picture static and ceases to find the subtler and subtler details that actually make that picture living, moving, breathing, and changeable. So by going more and more deeply in our analysis of what is going on in any given situation, whether it's helping a family member or trying to discover a problem in the root of a problem in one's own health, or trying to solve a problem in a community, or praying for peace in the world, all of those motivations that drive our actions will only be able to continue to grow and strengthen if at the same time we're looking more and more deeply at what is going on. So I said something tantalizing at the beginning about having motivations that could last for millions of years. And I want to get straight to the point. What may be unique in Buddhism as a worldview, and I'm always hesitant to say something like that, but even though there are many philosophical systems, religious systems in the world that have believed in the continuity of consciousness from lifetime to lifetime, Buddhism, especially Mahayana Buddhism, but also the earlier forms of Buddhism now understood as Theravada, but they weren't necessarily called that at the time, in the first 500, 600, 700 years of Buddhism. Everything about the Buddhist path is based upon the idea that one has a continuity of consciousness from lifetime to lifetime. And that, as I say, is shared with other worldviews, especially within India. But that one can set motivations that will continue, will have a trajectory across those lifetimes, even though one won't be the same person across those lifetimes. And that, if you've never heard that before, that may sound really strange, but I'll try to explain a little bit more. Many of you may have heard that in Buddhism, there's the idea or the teaching of no self or non-self. And of course, the worst misunderstanding of that would be, I don't exist. Not what it meant. It's not what the Buddha meant. There are many things it does mean, but in the context of what I'm saying now, it means that there isn't an inherently existing soul or fixed identity that moves from lifetime to lifetime, which of course many schools of Indian, what one might call Hindu thought, though they don't all quite fit under the word Hindu, but Indian thought did believe that there was a soul, an Atman, that moved from lifetime to lifetime. And so what was fresh and different and difficult to understand about the Buddha's teaching was that he accepts the continuity of consciousness from lifetime to lifetime, but says no, there's no real identity of you that's doing that traveling. But for us now, if we want to learn something from this worldview, the key is to ask that question, well, what is it that continues? Because what is it that continues that my choices right now could have an effect 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now? And there be a continuity to that. And it's not simply how my actions have affected others. Because we can imagine, even if there were to be human life on this planet 1,000,000 years from now, oh, well, my actions affect others and that affects others, and generationally. I think most people agree that actions affect others generationally, and we see how the actions of individuals, whether for better or for worse, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, are actually affecting us now. But this is talking about actions in a stream affecting the same stream of consciousness in the future. And so to even grapple with that, it's quite important to look inside and say, well, what do I think my consciousness is? What do I think it means to have a stream of consciousness? Because when we meditate, we're looking straight at that. We are actually starting to have a direct experience of what it is to be conscious and how that is distinct from our bodies, simply being a body, being in a body, and how our mental consciousness is distinct from our sensory consciousnesses. Because I think many people think, oh, well, my consciousness is what I see, what I hear, what I taste, touch, and smell. And then I think about those things, but I'm not really sure what is that thinking stuff, you know? But the idea that there can be a mental consciousness which is aware of what we think, and that has a continuity to it, which is, while we're alive in a body, intimately interrelated with the way that our sensory consciousnesses work. But the mental consciousness is not dependent upon the sensory consciousnesses for existing at all. You see, so they're massively interrelated. That's what it is to see something that we really like and to then have a desire arise. That happens all the time, right? Or see something that disgusts us and have mental aversion arise. That's an interrelationship between a sensory consciousness and a mental consciousness. But can we get so in touch with our mental consciousness that we can even comprehend that that mental consciousness has its own continuity to it that could continue even if there were no sensory consciousnesses that are dependent upon the body? And within Buddhist logic, there is actually a very straightforward and simple proof, demonstration for the existence of past and future lives, which within monastic study, actually for well over 1,000 years, closer to 2,000 years, that proof has sort of just been like a sidelight of, yeah, you got to do that one and then continue. It's not at the center of monastic training because it was taken for granted in so many ways. That, well, of course, everyone actually accepted the existence of a continuity of consciousness. And so there are countless other things you need to focus on in understanding the nature of reality and then overcoming mental afflictions and ways of misseeing the world. But for us in this day and age, it's actually quite important to take time to look at that, to find out what we actually think. Because I think many of us don't quite know what we think about who I am and where did I come from and where am I going. But the demonstration in Buddhist terms doesn't even make sense if we don't have an experience of what it is to be mentally conscious, as in a self-conscious experience of being mentally conscious, because we all have the experience of it. That's what it is to be awake and to be hearing and understanding and having thoughts. But to be self-aware, I am mentally conscious. And at the first moment that consciousness came into this life, was there a moment before it? Because in our natural world, we're used to seeing how everything has a precedent. Matter itself always has a precedent. I won't get into the Big Bang for a moment, but for now, but knowing that even physicists don't think that something came out of nothing at all. They have to look for, well, what caused the Big Bang, right? And if you see that as a wormhole from another universe, okay. But it's still the idea that there has to have been a continuity because nothing comes from nothing. So many of us fall into, almost by habit or by culture, thinking, well, it came out of some complex configuration of atoms, or, like egg and the sperm. Yeah, consciousness must have come from that, right? But if you look at that carefully, really look at it, the technical argument, and I'll make this quick, if it came from a material whole, including all of its parts, and it needed all of those parts, and that's what it is to say a whole with its parts, then if even one atom were missing, it wouldn't bring its result. I'll let you think about that. Because there's also the question of material similarity of, well, what's the material configuration of certain kinds of cells in human beings? And the radical difference of mind streams, the radical difference of the kinds of inclinations and thought processes and talents and mental afflictions that different individuals have. And where in matter are you ever going to find those kinds of differences? But if somehow consciousness were depending on those little bits of matter in a fertilized egg, for example, would the different aspects of consciousness which have a nature of feelings, desires, longings, everything that it is to be human, if they were dependent on those particular kinds of material configurations, then if even one little bit of them weren't there, then you wouldn't have those kinds of mental qualities. If you really think about it, it's just, it points out the radical difference between material entities and mental entities. The other side of that is, well, if it wasn't the whole with its parts, then it would be the matter itself, every single particle of that matter. But then if atoms themselves could give rise to consciousness, then everything would give rise to consciousness. And rocks would be conscious, and trees would be conscious. And of course, there are actually some who say that. But what does it mean? Because it shows that we all have different definitions of consciousness that aren't necessarily based in having sought the root of what the experience of being conscious is. Because, and this comes back to the idea of the stream, part of the understanding of consciousness in Buddhism is a causal continuum, as in each moment is giving rise to the next moment as something similar to itself. Not similar in all its variety, but similar in its basic nature, as in conscious. It's luminous, it's clear, it's not located in space, and it is able to know, as in it takes in information in a way that is cognized. And one almost can't say more than that, because you have to know what it is to cognize, and then say, well, how is it, what would it mean for a rock to be cognizing? And do I have any evidence for that whatsoever? And of course, when we look at creatures, insects, snails, we could see an awful lot of evidence for cognizing, because there is that reaction to stimuli. There is that movement of limbs in ways that show, shall we say, contentment and agitation. I mean, you know the difference between a contented ant and an agitated ant, if you've really looked. Much less a fly or wasp. So I throw those things out for you to contemplate. Perhaps you feel like you already have a deep conviction, one way or another, about these things. But I invite you to look, what do I think my stream of consciousness is? And where did it come from? And if the specific causes, mental causes that brought that consciousness, and I won't even say me right now, brought that consciousness into this lifetime, could the things that I am doing now have an effect on how that consciousness will continue after it is no longer bound or apparently limited by this experience of a body? Because if one can see that consciousness is, and I will use the word element in a very broad sense now, because we have our particular understanding of elements as in the periodic table of elements. I'm not talking that way at all right now. I'm saying as in a domain of reality. And the way that solid things are a domain, liquid things are a domain, heat is a domain. You know, see, I'm going through the elements in a well, there are many different systems of thought that see the elements this way, but it's not as in earth, air, fire, water, but it's the qualities of those kinds of phenomena. And if you think about the nature of, as I say, solid things which are physical, liquid things which are obviously physical, fire which is moving in the nature of the way that physical things interact with each other, heat, and then air, which is this combination of the strong combination of space and the movement of things through space. And then you expand to space itself, the openness in which things may exist. And then there's consciousness. And consciousness isn't any of those other five. So that's the sense in which I mean element right now. And to say that element of consciousness, that domain of consciousness, is something that has its own causal continuum, that propagates itself. But when I say itself, not as in it's its own inherent cause, it's a stream of causes where everything is dependent on that which came before, and that which is future is being generated by what is done now. And so if the birth of a child, let's think in the human realm right now, of a child, and the death of a human being at whatever age that may be, is something that even from the outside we observe and experience only at the physical level. It's a body, right? And if minds don't have direct access to other minds, which in most cases we don't know, we have no ability to see where that mind came from or where that mind is going. So to ask these questions actually becomes deeply subjective. And it needs to be subjective in the best sense of the term, looking into our own mind and saying, who am I? And am I any of my physical constituents, really? And am I any of my individual thoughts? Well, no, because we can see the very impermanent nature of our thoughts, desires, motivations, and so on. But is there an element, in this very sense I've been speaking just now, an element there that is continuous, that, and of course, consciousness, as I said earlier, is luminous and cognizant. It's the simple crystal clarity of awareness. It doesn't need to have content in order to be awareness. And so that's why it's so important to look at, well, what is that crystal clarity that's moving through time? And then it can start to make sense how all our thoughts, actions, desires, for good or for ill, can actually be accretions to that stream. But they're causal accretions, which means that that stream will reflect who we've been in the past. And what we're doing now will be reflected within that stream in the future. And actually, the term stream, which is used in Sanskrit and Tibetan for the mind, but its analogy with water is strong because it's so vivid. What goes into a stream stays in that stream and affects that stream and comes out later downstream. And so to think, it's okay to think, and this is analogical, not literal, analogical to think of our mind as this crystal clear stream. And what do we want to put in that stream? See? So coming to our motivation supernova, as I dared to title this talk as a mere label. If we could see that our mind is that crystal clarity that is always conscious, but in its content could become anything at all, as in what it's populated by could actually become anything at all, then why should our desires be limited? Why should our motivations be limited to who we think we are now? Because who we think we are now is deeply conditioned by who we've been in the past, as well as the entire environment and the other sentient beings with whom we interact in this particular time and place, as in a very short human lifetime. But if our motivations and the choices we make are always limited by who we think we are in the range of possibilities we have, we'll make limited choices, or we'll get really, really depressed because we wish that we could change the world, right? That's become a cliche. How can it be a cliche in our language and yet everybody individually, except perhaps megalomaniacal leaders, most everybody realizes I can't fundamentally be the one to change the world. And so as we grow older, we tend to get smaller, limit down on our conative directionality, because we say, oh, well, I'm just being smart now. I'm only doing what I know I really can do because I actually want to succeed in something, rather than those big dreams I had as a child or a teenager. And so what I, with my whole heart, am challenging each of you to think about today. What would my motivation be if there were no limits to who I am? And that's not only the temporal changeability of a mind stream. If a mind stream went on forever, I could become anything in the future, but it is a existentially spatial, infinite. And I say existentially because it's not as in physical space that we think our universe is in, which doesn't really make sense either, but leaving that be, existential space as in reality, the totality of what could be. That's how big the mind can be. Because consciousness it's not physical, it's not located anywhere, so what could ever actually limit it except itself, except where it lets itself stop thinking or lets itself stop imagining. So what the Buddha, and specifically when the Buddha taught what's known as the Mahayana, or the greater vehicle, the greater capacity by which to travel the road to enlightenment. So primarily in what are known as the Mahayana Sutras, especially the Prajnaparamita, or the perfection of wisdom sutras, perhaps even the transcendence of wisdom sutras. What he challenged his disciples to imagine was, could you have a trajectory in which you make a promise to every sentient being that ever is, was, or will be, but since sentient beings are mind streams that go on forever, that's everyone now, because that's a totality of mind streams, which are distinct, which are individual, but are infinitely changeable. And so it's not as if it's individual persons in the way we think of a person, like with a whole history and story around it, but more like whole trajectories and individual trajectories of consciousness, to make a promise to every single one of these. I will become what it takes, what is needed for every one of you to become what it takes, what it is needed for every one of you to reach a state of perfection, to reach a state of fulfillment, to reach a state of totality. But you notice in what I just said there, and this is not a tautology, it's actually very meaningful. The promise of a bodhisattva is to lead everyone else to be a bodhisattva, which means that everyone else is making the same promise to everyone else, which is making the same promise to everyone else, which is making the same promise to everyone else. And actually, totality won't be reached, fulfillment won't be reached until every mind stream has been completed in that way that it is completely and equally responsible for everyone else. And doesn't that sound, for those of you who may have a deeply theistic, specifically Judeo-Christian background, doesn't that sound like promising to be the mind of God for everyone else? Because it's saying, I want to be eternal love, total, boundless, inconceivable love for all time and all space, for all that exists. So that's a divine promise. And so when I said earlier that what may be unique in Buddhism is this idea of making a promise that will last across countless lifetimes into the future in order to achieve this goal. I say it's unique in that specific expression and that specific conceptualization of what it means to have future lifetimes in which one will continue to progress along a path that may take, in our current conception of time, millions of years. It's called 3 countless eons, but if you actually know what a countless eon looks like, it's definitely millions of years, each one. Whereas and I'll speak from my familiarity with a Christian context specifically, the promise is there, but the specification of how it's going to turn out after this lifetime isn't detailed as much. I think I can say that with confidence, that the idea that one could make a promise that is Christ-like, that is completely in union with that which Christ is and that which Christ expressed in his death on the cross for the sake of all beings, as their creator and as their redeemer at once. This is classic Christian language, Christian understanding. And so the promise to be Christ-like, to follow in his footsteps to the best of our ability, and that which the Christian mystics have seen for so long as being what will be accomplished only fully in heaven, only fully later, from glory to glory, it's a sense of an ever ascending path of union with the mind of God. But the tradition just doesn't try to lay out as clearly, well, what's that going to look like after this life is done? Whereas Buddhism, with its expression of quite concretely continuity of consciousness from lifetime to lifetime, not all of which are human, can lay out that path in such a way that one is just encouraged to conceive of it a bit more, as in, well, I'll plant seeds in this life, which will enable me to progress along that same path in a future lifetime, if my commitment is deep enough. So I'm saying this way because I want to, again, challenge you, whatever your current worldview may be, to see how radically differently, sometimes very similar ideas can be expressed in different contexts, and not to be daunted by those differences, but rather to be encouraged that there is something so fundamental here. But some of us will feel much more comfortable in one or another context. And that's important. We do have to feel comfortable enough that we can believe in a path, but we also have to feel uncomfortable enough that we keep asking questions and don't stagnate. So, since in this context, it is still my intention to explain even what the term bodhicitta means. And all of this was prelude to that, because one needs to have this in mind to even get a glimpse of what that word could mean. Literally in Sanskrit, bodhicitta. Bodhi is enlightenment, awakening. Awakening is actually a more literal translation of bodhi, but the Tibetans didn't translate it as awakening at all. They translated it as sangye, which is totally purified and totally magnified, flourished, expanded, fulfilled. So, and what that literally means is like a definition in a single word. A Buddha is one who has purified all negative qualities and has accomplished all positive qualities at the kind of infinite level I was indicating a few minutes ago. So in the term bodhicitta, the word bodhi indicates that. And chitta is simply the word for mind, one of several Sanskrit words for mind. But mind of enlightenment can be quite misleading without further explanation, because it would imply it's a Buddha's mind. But the whole point of the teaching is that our minds can be turned into bodhicitta even very, very early in our path. And so because the word mind can also have all these other connotations of that which a mind does, mental processes, it's referring to the whole range of cognitive intelligence with respect to bodhi, which is awakening. So it is first the dumba, the aspiration, which is turning into an intention, that is leaning toward, that is converging one's energies upon a purpose. And then as that is reinforced, cultivated, it becomes an intention, and an irreversible intention. A spontaneous intention that's actually there all the time. And so here at the Center for Contemplative Research, we speak a great deal about path, and what is it to reach a path and to proceed along a path. And very precisely speaking, to enter the Mahayana path, this great vehicle, to get in the vast boat that you're going to bring all sentient beings with you into that boat to enlightenment, is not simply to have, oh, wouldn't it be nice? I'd like to become a Buddha. Not simply, I want to work really hard and I'm going to work, and I have worked for years to attain the spiritual, mental transformations and breakthroughs that it will take to proceed along this path of a bodhisattva. So it's not just the wish, it's not just the determination, it's not even the practice. It is getting to a critical point in one's practice where that intention is arising spontaneously in every state of mind one has. And so, formally speaking, bodhicitta is not even the intention. It's the primary mind. This is a technical term again in Buddhist philosophy, but it's the state of mind that holds two thoughts. Thought isn't even really the right word, as two mental processes. One is the intention to achieve enlightenment, and one is the intention to do so for all sentient beings. Because both of those, they're distinct enough. They're not exactly the same thought, but they have to be there in one state of mind together in order for it to be bodhicitta. It's not simply wanting to be a Buddha. I mean, that sounds like fun, right? But it's wanting to be a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. Or one can want to help all sentient beings, but not yet have realized the necessity of becoming a totally perfected Buddha. And that is actually a preliminary stage along the path to bodhicitta. It's a necessary stage to one's whole existence to be of ultimate service to all sentient beings. But one has to come to that frustration in a way that this frustration I was speaking about at our very broad level of, I can't do it as long as I'm me. As long as I'm who I think I am, no way. I can't help one being really, much less all of them. So this double intention held within a single state of mind, that state of mind is the chitta. It's the sem in Tibetan, which is oriented toward awakening. But because then that becomes a state of mind, it's as if you've turned your whole mind stream into bodhicitta, into awakening mind. But if we translate it as awakening mind, it's problematic because if we don't know that whole explanation, it doesn't evoke this unstoppable determination, this unstoppable intention, this promise to all sentient beings, I will become a Buddha for you. You see? So that's why sometimes we don't translate a word. Bodhicitta holds all of it. And once you learn that, once you start to hold that in your own mind stream, what that means, much less to have it, then the word bodhicitta evokes the whole story, the whole content. So what does it take to cultivate our conative intelligence that we're turning our mind into bodhicitta continuously until it arises spontaneously? And that doesn't mean we don't have to keep working, because once bodhicitta arises spontaneously, then our work is to completely stabilize in meditation, not simply that intention, but what it's going to take to carry it out, which is the realization of emptiness, which is the realization of our own personal identitylessness, that I'm not who I think I am, and therefore this mind stream can turn into a Buddha. One has to realize that emptiness at progressively deeper and deeper levels until it's direct, non-conceptual communion with the ultimate nature of our own being and the ultimate nature of everyone else's being. And along that path, then one needs to cultivate so many different qualities. What many of you may know as the 6 perfections or transcendences of generosity, of ethics, of perseverance, in the sense of patience and not getting angry, not getting frustrated, not giving up when everything seems to be against us. That's actually one of the prime bodhisattva qualities, to be able to maintain that kind of patience. And the enthusiastic perseverance, which is joy in doing good. And that's what carries us through those hard times. And then the last two, which are kind of like the lifeblood of the path, shamatha and vipassana. Shamatha being the stability of mind that can hold all of these qualities unwaveringly. And vipassana being the discerning intelligence that looks more and more and more deeply at the nature of our reality, so that we'll see the actual root of the problems. As I was speaking earlier, at the broadest sense, if we have to keep investigating to find out what's wrong, well, vipassana is the practice in a state of deep meditative stillness, of investigating what's the nature of reality. And there are countless realities we have to discover the nature of, but once you get the key to one, then all the dominoes fall and you start to see the nature of all things. And so that's why the insight into not being who I think I am actually is the doorway to seeing matter itself is not what I think it is. But like it goes both ways. One also needs to realize the lack of identity, of inherent identity of all kinds of phenomena in order to see I'm not really inherently any of the qualities I thought I was, which is why that stream of pure crystal clear consciousness can turn into the infinite, limitless Buddha mind, the divine mind. The love of the creator for creation. Because there is a point at which seeing into the depths of one's own consciousness, that's not anybody else's, but it's not what we thought of as a limited me. See what I'm saying? It's right here. It's not anywhere else. It's this consciousness, but it's infinitely deeper than what our normal surface level state of consciousness had been. And when you see into that dimension, then it actually is the source of everything. And it's not a fixed source. It's a dynamic ground from which all purity, all paradises can arise. And through the veiling of ignorance and obscuration, where our suffering worlds have arisen from as well. And so that's why bodhicitta is not, say, it's not only this linear sense of, I want to become that thing, that concept of what a Buddha is in order to help everybody else and bring them there. I mean, one has to think about that early on, because otherwise it's almost impossible to understand. But at a certain stage, even within the path, one starts tapping down, down, down into what's already here, which is the depth and breadth and infinite ocean of a divine consciousness that's always been here. And that's where, as I say, it comes back into a kind of a union with a Christian understanding of union with God, that, well, the Buddha isn't something I need to become, because the Buddha, the Dharmakaya, the mind of God is always unchanging, complete. And the path is more about getting rid of everything else that I thought I was in order to be in communion with that, which is the source of all goodness and always has been, and is doing the work already of guiding every sentient being to their ultimate perfection, which is to be this divine mind and not apart from it. But one more point, and this is where I'll stop before we go into our meditation. when you get on the verge of that kind of understanding, that this divine Buddha mind is already present, it's not something to be achieved as if it weren't there already. And one has given up so much of one's own sense of individual driving. I want to do, I want to achieve, I want to accomplish in our habitual human way of thinking that. There's a very subtle point that is actually quite important to understand and not be caught by, which is to somehow think, well, there's really nothing I have to do because God is already, and I'll just step back. And at a certain point, couldn't that turn into a laziness? Couldn't that turn into a, well, what do I have to contribute? There's nothing really for me to do here. And then that's an apathy. It's a giving up. And there's a mind stream listening. And if that mind stream that's listening hears us give up, then what kind of causes is that creating? That's creating causes for being a limited being in the future. And so that's what it is to be trapped in what Buddhism calls samsara. It's collapsing down again to thinking, I just want to perpetuate this particular limited being's desires, because what can I do on the vast scale? So the reason one needs to keep cultivating actively without giving up the enormity of the motivation is because if we don't, back to stagnation, right? We'll just go back to the way we were. And that won't just stop there. It won't just be over when we die. That has created causes for a future self, which is still limited and doesn't have the kind of momentum to actually break through the chains of the cycle of suffering for one person, much less everybody. So in order to truly achieve our own liberation, and the Mahayana teaches this, even those who have sought their individual liberation and have achieved the total cessation of their mental afflictions, known as an arhat, from a Mahayana perspective, even they cannot achieve their total fulfillment that way. They need to be brought up to the Mahayana, to this infinite intention, even for their own fulfillment, much less everyone else's. So to get that intuition that even individually, we will not be satisfied until we have become the infinity of what the divine mind is, which is taking care of every being forever as their own creation, one's own child, one's own heart. Because where else is fulfillment if it weren't that? So I said I would challenge you today. And I won't apologize, because even if you didn't like it, it'll help you. So let's meditate. So as you have found your comfortable posture for meditation, I invite you to allow your energy first to descend into the ground, your experience of gravity at a quite physical level to begin. Experiencing the solidity of the earth element. Where your physical form comes in contact with the earth. And feel the fluidity, all this liquid within your body. When you sometimes feel achy or heavy or stiff. Allow that fluidity that is already within you to massage, to flow over that which is hard or pointed within you. You can access this fluidity with your mind. Let it fill you. So that the energies in your body start to settle like cool, clear water. And then feel that fire within you that is not simply heat, but it is the energy of life, that which holds you upright. And then feel the gentle, undulating spaciousness of the air element within you, flowing as your breath. Allow your breath to fill you gently and release on each exhalation as much as your body needs, not forcing, not pushing. simply surrendering to the wisdom of the breath itself. Then I invite you to begin expanding the breath, especially around the area of your heart, letting the ribs expand as they need to, as you bring your center of energy, center of mind, down into the level of your heart. Not the physical organ, but where your energetic center is, behind the sternum, just in front of the spine. Plunge to that place that sometimes we cover over because it's too hard to open it. Because somehow we know that if we open, we'll feel too much, and that's okay. You can't feel too much when it comes to developing bodhicitta, developing the transcendence of your own conative intelligence. And so, as though opening a window onto the whole of reality, past, present, future, transcending the bounds of space. Ask yourself, who am I? All sorts of images may come up of your picture of who you have been in this life. Images of yourself at different ages, in different circumstances, relationships. But right now, are they simply pictures, stories? Look upon who is aware of these stories right now. What is this experience of being aware? And you taste its qualities. The sheer vibrancy that illuminates any image that comes to mind, that illuminates any sensory object, such as a sound or the tactile sensations of your body. How are those made into appearances? For matter itself doesn't look like anything. And how in the very same instant of illuminating is there knowing, the quality of knowing. What does it feel like right here, right now? Whatever comes to mind. If you let go if you let go the conception of your body as yours, but for the moment, identify, if you need to identify at all, simply with this stream of illuminating and knowing. Can you imagine that illumination touching the whole of existence? Begin just with this planet and situations, even the labels of countries, continents, oceans will come to mind. Can you even imagine seeing all of them at once from a single perspective? All the sentient beings, their desires, their agonies, their confusion, even those who seem to be doing very well. Are they really happy? As if in an instant your heart could be connected to the innermost heart. First of all, the human beings on the planet. And then all the sentient beings, the animals of every kind, other types of sentient beings we can't even see right now, but individual streams of awareness, of desire, of pain. What if you could see them all at once? What if you had the ability to take away their suffering? And your mind turn into the vast virtue that says, I will do it. I will take away this suffering, whatever it takes. And you feel how that changes your mind stream itself. And as if in the very same thought, you become the wellspring of goodness, of joy, the source of everything that every sentient being could need. Your heart becomes like a supernova of light. See that this itself is joy, being the source of goodness for others. equally, spreading everywhere without partiality. The effulgence of divine love. Find this rock of your center, who you are, who you yearn to be. And know what sheer goodness feels like. Could all of your decisions, your choices, derive from this center? So that if someone asked, or you ask yourself, who am I? It looked like this supernova of goodness coming from your heart. Is that who you are? And all your choices derive from this. In whatever you are experiencing right now, make a decision totally private to yourself. What have you discovered? What do you wish to do? What do you intend to do? And even as our meditation has been at the foundation of setting a motivation, cultivating a motivation, I invite you now to dedicate that power of goodness that you have accessed so vividly in your own hearts. I know you have. And then see how that goodness itself could become a cause for the very goal to which it aspires. And like releasing an arrow, project, send that goodness forward to accomplish the good for which it is aimed. So I know we've come to about 90 minutes now, but I invite your questions, all of those of you online. I think you can send questions through the chat. And if you can stay, of course, you're most welcome to stay. I felt it was important to continue the thread of the content of the talk a little bit longer, but I'm very happy to stay for your questions now. And of course, if you need to go, you're welcome to go.
I have a question about, I've been turning over in my mind a lot regarding if you don't know or you don't have the belief that you'll have this next lifetime, in effect, you have this perspective that this is your only lifetime. Mm-hmm. So even from that perspective, it might make the most sense to think of the greatest effect or greatest impact of our motivations to be affecting another person. And even if we do become reincarnated, mm-hmm. We, quote unquote, we don't remember who we were. We don't know the person who we're going to be. So in effect, for someone with an ordinary mind, it is as if you are doing something good for another person. So there's that there seems to be kind of like a tipping point there where you, for certainty in this type of motivation, you need to know or need to have that. So I'm rambling.
Yeah, no, I think I get your question, and it was something I actually had in mind for today. So thank you for raising it. And for anyone who can't hear through the Zoom call, the question is essentially if one doesn't yet have the certainty that this consciousness will continue into a future lifetime, and one's creating causes, but it seems as though that'll be another person. Even if there is continuity, as I said, if it's not the same person, as in the whole amalgam of personality, name, traits, history, and so on, it's as if one's doing those things for someone else. And I want to say yes. Actually, Shantideva, in his great Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, the Bodhicharya Avatara, makes this point in terms of emptiness as a way of meditating on the equality of self and other. Well, actually, if you think of the string of your lifetimes, and he's taking that for granted as if his audience just takes that as given, but if you think of the stream of your lifetimes, that's a whole series of people, like beads on a mala. And if we look at all the people in this room, if you look at all the people in any group, they're connected too, as individuals, as if on a mala, right? Or as a group. I think the analogy of an army. They're connected to a unified purpose. So it's a wonderful meditation on equanimity, actually, or impartiality. Can you care as much about all the people next to you as you do about your future life? And that's a real challenge, right? To say, oh, is that what impartiality means? Is that what immeasurable compassion and loving kindness mean? That I care as much about the future. tomorrow's future for everybody here as I do about next life's future for who I think I am. And I think actually for people who take past and future lives as given, that's a bigger challenge because they're trained from childhood to really, really care about what karma am I planting for my future life. We're trained to care about that, and one should. But I think you can actually use the very doubt that you're expressing, whether it's yours or someone else's, you can use that for practice to spread your caring laterally, as it were, and then realize, well, even if it's not me, I need to care about the future resultant continuum of this causal continuum, as in within the stream of a mind. I care about that because it's a sentient being. Does that help for now? I'm sure there are more questions, so we'll come back to that. I feel I want to look at the chat because things are coming quickly. Yeah, you can.
Two actual questions are right.
Thank you.
And then someone.
Okay. Okay, I think I can answer these two a little bit together. One is, does divine consciousness and primordial consciousness have the same meaning? For those of you who've studied in a Buddhist context for some time, you're aware of this translation of the immensely rich term yeshe, in Sanskrit jnana, as primordial consciousness. I am bringing the word divine consciousness into this in a way that it wouldn't necessarily be used in Buddhism, because in Buddhism, divinities or Hla are not necessarily Buddhas. They're more like gods with a small g. The whole realm of beings that are like gods, but not as in the God, not the one God. So I'm using the word divine consciousness a little bit loosely, actually. Because I think it has deep resonance for those coming from a theistic tradition, from a theistic background. But within Buddhism, where there's a very specific definition of primordial consciousness as, well, even depending on context, primordial consciousness is a dimension of very subtle consciousness that we have within us, and that is primordial in the sense of it has no beginning. It has always been that way. But it is pure in the sense that it's not defiled by all the layers of habitual propensities, mental afflictions, and karma that manifest at the coarser levels of our consciousness. Primordial consciousness is very subtle, and it goes along in a stream from lifetime to lifetime, but almost entirely veiled for ordinary beings. And so a huge part of the path, especially at the advanced levels, is to unveil that primordial consciousness. So one's not creating anything new, but one is making it manifest. It certainly has divine qualities in the sense that we mean those divine qualities in the West. All goodness, all truth, all beauty, all intelligence, and so on. Primordial consciousness can manifest all of those qualities. But there is specifically primordial consciousness realizing emptiness, which has a definition to it that I won't go into now. But I hope that helps. The other has to do with this, are mind streams individual or not? Which I think may be related in part to your question as well. Yes, I am speaking as mind streams as individual. And that's why I emphasize so much about a causal continuum. What makes mind streams individual is their individual chains of cause and effect. As in the karma that is experienced by this mind, or rather the karma, the deed that is experienced by this mind subjectively, propagates itself within not very subtle consciousness, but subtle consciousness. So hidden to our coarse mind, but still very much there. And so then the mind that experiences the result of that karma has to be the same mind. It has to be the same causal stream. And that's why this analogy of a water stream is very helpful, because we know what it means to have separate bodies of water. But what can be very difficult in a way with the same analogy, and because there are other schools of thought, not in Buddhism, that talk about the convergence of mind streams into one, is to think, oh, well, there's a lot of streams of water, so they can stream into the great ocean of consciousness. Buddhism doesn't say that. But what the person asking the question raises is that as one gets more and more advanced along this path of opening to the infinity of primordial consciousness, and by infinity, I mean as in what it's not limited in what it knows. There's a permeability of mind streams being able to know the content of one another, but it doesn't make them merge as in they're the same mind stream. And that's speaking about beings at very high levels of the path. They can have extraordinary intuition about what is taking place in one another's mind. And then there are the extremely difficult to understand phenomena of very advanced beings manifesting in more than one body on the earth at the same time. So I won't try to go there, but people have heard of that. And so it can raise that question of, well, is this one in the many of mind streams itself? Is that flexible? Is that malleable? My understanding is not as long as you're a sentient being. So sentient beings are by definition causal streams that are individual. The more advanced you get along the path, the more permeable the knowledge, but not the stream itself. And actually that can make sense to us at the very ordinary level of two people who know each other very well, can know things about one another, but they know that doesn't make them the same person. And so think of that at the level of consciousness knowing consciousness directly. Great beings can know very directly that the intentions, the intuitions, etc., of another being, but it doesn't mean they've become the same mind stream. At the level of complete enlightenment, the mind of all the Buddhas, as it's sometimes referred to, the Dharmakaya, it transcends the one and the many. One really has to say it that way. It transcends the one and the many in the way that we think of it. So I hope that helps, but it's most importantly, as long as we're sentient beings, definitely individual mind streams. And that's why we're responsible for the causes we plant in our own mind streams. Any more questions along here?
What about does causal efficacy travel into the past in Buddhism? Does it flow towards the source? I think that captures most of what's.
Can you say the how far down it is?
It was
Or how it starts?
From Emmerich Damien. It says, does causal efficacy travel into the past in Buddhism? Does the river flow toward the source as well, carrying on the analogy of a river?
So what I'll say to that is not exactly. Because the idea of, it's more that past and future come from causes rather than the other way around. It's not as if there's a real past and a real future and causes could go into either direction. Time itself is merely constructed. And so the present is turning into the future as causes give rise to their results. But from the perspective of the present, an ever-changing present, the past can look different based on causes that are bringing their results now. So, and Lemma Alan Wallace has made this analogy to quantum physics and quantum cosmology, where the past is changed per se, according to the questions one asks of it from the present. And I think in a Buddhist context, one would say, because of seeds or causes ripening in the present, that can radically affect how we view the past. And because that past has no inherent nature as really being one thing or another thing, the perspective on what happened can validly change. But it's not as if the arrow of time, as it were, turned in the opposite direction. And actually, I see one other question here that's so related to what I was saying about primordial consciousness versus, or in relationship to the term divine consciousness. Is primordial consciousness Buddha nature or not? So the term Buddha nature, for those of you familiar with the idea of the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, the first turning of the wheel of Dharma being what has become the Theravada or the Hinayana body of teachings, but still deeply respected and practiced by the Mahayana. The second turning of the wheel of Dharma, focusing primarily on the emptiness of inherent nature of all phenomena, as the Buddha taught it in the Transcendence of Wisdom Sutras, the Prajnaparamita. And then the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, relating primarily to this idea of Buddha nature, a purity at the heart of all sentient beings that is the seed that will turn into our being Buddhas. And that it's that seed that needs to be cultivated in order to become Buddhas. And indeed, entering the Mahayana is sometimes referred to as awakening the lineage of the Buddhas that's already within us. There's still different schools of thought, even within Tibetan Buddhism, as to how Buddha nature is interpreted, as in what is it? We know that it's that purity at the root of all beings that enables them to become Buddhas, but is it consciousness or is it emptiness? And the Gelug school, the Gelugpa school, tracing very much to the thought of Lama Tsongkhapa in the 14th and 15th century, primarily interpret Buddha nature as emptiness itself. So it is the emptiness of inherent nature of me, and of, apply that each to yourself. I am not inherently who I think I am, any identity at all. Therefore, this emptiness, once the positive quality, as in the phenomenal qualities, are cultivated and flourished, that emptiness itself will turn into the emptiness of a Buddha, which is called the Svabhava Kaya of the four Kayas. It is the essential nature of a Buddha, is the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. And so, according to that interpretation, the emptiness that I am now and the emptiness of a Buddha are the same emptiness. And that doesn't even go along in a stream, because emptiness is timeless. Emptiness is an unchanging thing. So that identity, which is identitylessness, with what the Buddha will be, is the way the Buddha nature is understood in the Sutrayana teachings, the open teachings within the Gelugpa school. I'm not sure whether that's ever discussed differently within Vajrayana specifically, because Vajrayana focuses much more on this stream of primordial consciousness or very subtle mind. But definitely within other schools, and I don't want to go into too much detail here, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, pristine awareness, which is sometimes used synonymously with primordial consciousness. It's almost like pristine awareness is a particular kind of primordial consciousness. Seems like there are divisions or facets of primordial consciousness that aren't specifically pristine awareness, raw pristine awareness. That could be equivalent to Buddha nature, but it points out to me that there's ways that terminology is used in different ways in different contexts, and one can't always assume that they mean exactly the same thing. Have I missed anything else now?
People have their hands raised.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to respond?
Hi, so happy to be here. So in thinking about the bodhicitta vow and the sort of immensity of it, when I started practicing a few years ago, I was able to find this little door. And it takes me a while to find it again, but rightly or wrongly, I decided I would grow it by finding a source, a very small source, and grow it bigger and bigger and bigger over time, since I couldn't fathom what it meant to. And I found it in this moment when my husband was dying and I was in the hospital room with him at night. For some reason, I was kneeling. I think he was on the commode, and there was a look that passed between us that when I go back there, it opens this door, and I can feel it. And when I feel it there in this little kernel, like this little seed, I can let it expand. And it's not because, I mean, the thing that's carried me through 4 years after his death of, I would say searching, but it's not searching, it's opening. Because since he isn't him anymore, since he isn't the same anymore, if there are these clubs of consciousness clubs like Sukhavati and so forth, if his changed consciousness is somewhere out there and there is no time, then I'd like to be a light that can be found within any part of his lifetime. I would like to be there again and again and again. And is that how we collect our consciousnesses together? To me, this feels like a motivation that goes countless eons, but I'm starting with one love, one seed of one love to grow maybe into the motivation for countless eons, because I don't know what a countless eon is, but I know that wherever
Right.
this person is, in whatever form, I want to be there and be available.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing this beautiful story. I don't know how many of you could hear that through my computer, but we do cultivate bodhicitta on the basis of specific experiences. And that's what I want to be able to, for everyone who has heard your story. When we can taste the intensity of love that is not based in attachment, as in, what do I get out of it? But love that is purely other-centered. What is, and that sees the beauty, the fundamental beauty of another person. And so what you describe at this moment of your husband's very close to his dying is that selflessness of love that passes between you and that does carry another person through the death process. Actually, that is how in Buddhism it's said that people can be of so much benefit to loved ones during the death process, because of all people whose prayers are going to matter at that time, it's the ones that have loved you the most and that are closest to you, because hearts are connected. And I think almost this is like a theme to in closing our time together today, is the distinctiveness of Mindstreams and the flood of connection between hearts. That's what enables this entire process to bear fruit. So yes, we can actively, in meditation, in our hearts, cultivate that kind of love, taking as an example the kind of experience you've described. Because I think each of us, if we look deeply enough, we find a moment in our lives where we experienced pure love like that, that was not in any way self-reflexive or turning back to, well, what do I need? What do I want? But is simply utterly for the goodness and the benefit of that other. And then this is actually part of the cultivation of the four immeasurables, to deliberately take examples of other people we may not know very well at all and say, could I tap into the purity within that person with the same tenderness, the same gentleness, the same openness that you've experienced in this extreme, this life-changing moment. And of course, it's impossible for us to see all the sentient beings on this planet right now, as we try to imagine in the meditation. But step by step by step, we can cultivate the capacity. And you test this with yourself when you meet new people and notice, different thoughts can arise, different judgments can arise, and how quickly can we dissolve the surface level judgments of another person when we first encounter them and go to that heart. And we're connecting with other people, sometimes at a level of goodness they can't even see yet. It's like you're penetrating to who are you really, which will transcend lifetimes. So I think what you were saying in terms of how can you see him wherever he is now, that mind stream that may not even be male. Who is that flow of a being? And then can you recognize that kind of goodness and thus cultivate your heart? So thank you. That's beautiful. I think there's one more hand raised on here.
Thank you so much. I want to, perhaps it will seem tangential to this discourse, but I would love to hear you. I'm a concert violinist and an art historian, and have taught and written, and I've my whole life has been dedicated to the arts. And I know that in your background, you were a dancer, and in this whole exploration, for me, in the whole path and the exploration of self and consciousness and no self and all of these things, I feel like I've experienced actually what you just spoke to, this sense of a love that's not connected to self, not connected to attachment or grasping. That there's in the creative impulse, there's something that exists, is so that there's no self on the part of the person who's performing or presenting it, or even if it's a painting or a poem, it doesn't matter if it's performing art, and the people who are receiving it, that somehow there's a synergy that exists apart from either the self of the person who's transmitting it or the selves of the people receiving it. And it moves, for me, it moves into a kind of sacred space, which then transcends this whole, well, what I perceive as a kind of struggle to come to terms with the temporal self versus this kind of eternal, I don't know, I'm not expressing it very well. It's hard to express in words, but I just wanted to ask you about that specifically, because in your own path, you've had a period in the arts, which is not the case of all the teachers that I've worked with. And I would love some guidance as I proceed with that kind of work.
Yeah, thank you. And again, for those of you who hear this, is talking about how artistic creation, artistic performance can bring us very close sometimes to some of these breakthroughs. And I won't say I've experienced that kind of, let me see. Even as you were speaking and as I start to speak, a vivid memory of being on stage comes to mind. So I want to be very careful how I try to speak about it. I was already studying Buddhism quite intensively and meditating regularly while I was performing as a professional dancer. Of course, my meditative practice was quite limited by the schedule that I was running, and I experienced an awful lot of sleepy meditations. But the intensity of what I was doing as a performing artist and what I was at the beginning of the path seeking within a spiritual life, within a contemplative life, I saw very much in tandem at the time, because the contemplative life gave meaning to what I was doing on stage. And what I was doing as a dancer, not only on stage, but in even the refinement of physicality that I had to do, I know was having an effect on the energetic body, the subtle body, that actually was really good for my meditation, even though overall I didn't have ideal conditions for meditation at the time. I think the point maybe that can be applied most broadly for all of us is that the arts stretch our imagination about what we think is real. And so engaging with artistic depiction, artistic expression is already playing with, dancing with the boundaries between reality and illusion. And that's really healthy if we can understand it from a virtuous perspective. Unfortunately, art, as we know, can also be used in ways that are not virtuous, that are actually increasing attachment, increasing aversion, increasing judgmentalism. So art can be used for basically all the states of mind that human beings have, whether mentally afflicted or very virtuous. So it's not as if I say, oh yes, art is spirituality, not point blank. But if art is used with a deeply virtuous, beneficial motivation to soften, to thin out the boundaries that people tend to place between each other, and to enable us to see more deeply into the layers and layers of personality. Of course, theater is fantastic for this as well. Understanding the depth of a character and being able to enter into the goodness of a character, even when the things they do are bad, but you can still see that there's a person there who has desires and longings and so on, that if they could be redirected, could become virtue. So it enables us to meditate on humanity, on human nature, and also, especially abstract art, can sometimes push our boundaries of how we even see. Painters know that nothing out there is just the way it looks on first glance, because the more you look, the more you see, and the more even perspective, spatial impressions aren't there the way they appear. So I think as much as the various types of art can bring us into direct relationship with the permeability and the illusory nature of appearances, that's really important. And insofar as it brings us into delving more deeply into the core of sentient beings while not judging them at the surface, that's also really powerful. And then there's the sheer explosion of joy sometimes, or pathos that can be expressed through music, through dance, through many different kinds of art, that I think can help us taste, touch that transcendent level. And of course, we know the enormous use of art, not only as a depiction, but as a practice within religious traditions themselves. So that's a whole other topic. But I hope that helps to affirm exactly where you're coming from, and may you be able to ride the waves of your artistic creativity to deeper and deeper insight about reality.
Thank you.
Anyone else here? I don't want to have missed any questions here. Doing my own scan here. I covered everything.
I think.
Okay. Well, and if I'm still alive a month from now, we'll have another of these. Remind me of the date. Do you know?
It's early June. It's
Yeah,
second
the 8th,
June.
I think it's June 8th. Yeah, June 8th, the second Saturday in June. And of course, I will reflect on where to go next, but definitely there will be continuity between what we've done today and next time. Yes. Thank you. And it's a joy to me to see all of your faces, and really to be in retreat and to know the power of our community here in Crestone on a continuous basis. I mean, it's very present for me. And so it's delightful to see new faces that I've not seen before. And so, Courtney, would you like to close off for us? This is my dear friend and colleague.
Hold these.
Courtney Johnson.
Yes. I'll be very brief. I can't imagine what I could add to that beautiful teaching. So thank you so much, Eva. This is what we do here at the Center for Contemplative Research, is really try to share teachings that invite people into contemplative practice in a variety of ways, through a variety of teachers and methods. And we have a mind lab here. That's what we call this center, where we have expert meditators, practitioners who are highly trained, moving along the path that Eva has described, but also collaborating with researchers so that we can kind of translate contemplative discoveries through contemplative science into the language of our time so that it resonates with as many people as possible in empirical fashion. So we advocate for taking contemplative discoveries seriously, and we try to use empirical methods to measure discoveries that people make and the impact on human flourishing. And then develop educational offerings that teach, in the variety of ways that can resonate with a variety of people. So this is one of those teachings. If you feel moved to support the CCR, we are really kind of complete in our initial investment in this mind lab here, which involves some renovation and building a cottage for Lama Allen, our founder. And we've sort of finished that phase, and we're moving into a more operational phase where we hope to develop educational offerings and more research. If any of you feel moved to support us, you can check our website. For those of you here, there's a donation options out in the vestibule. But as we always say, sort of the biggest contribution you can make is just cultivating your mind, your practice. And we hope to see you joining us again in the future. So thank you so much. And thank you, Eva, for the beautiful teaching. You are all welcome to stay and hang out and chat. We will give Eva some space to exit because she is in retreat, and we want to kind of protect the continuity of that. So.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say?
Well, simply to send my greetings and prayers and love to all of you on Zoom, and know that you're all in my retreat. So, peace be with you.